He grabbed her by the collar in front of 500 people and nobody moved. Not one person. She was on the floor trembling, her cane shattered beside her, and the man who built his empire on her back stood over her like she was nothing. But then, a stranger in worn-out boots stepped forward. No badge, no title, just a little girl tugging his sleeve whispering, "Daddy, help her." And what happened next, nobody in that airport was ready for it. If you're watching this from Chicago, Dallas, Phoenix, drop your city below. I want to see how far this story travels. Subscribe and stay with me. This one goes deep. The storm hit O'Hare International, the way bad things always do, without warning and without mercy. By 9 o'clock, the departure boards had gone dark across 3 terminals. Flights canceled, flights delayed. Thousands of people trapped inside glass and fluorescent light with nowhere to go and no idea when that would change. The kind of night that strips people down to exactly who they are. Caroline Marsh had survived worse than a storm. At 43, she had survived a father who treated love like a business transaction. She had survived a board of directors who spent 10 years waiting for her to fail. She had survived a car accident that took the full use of her right leg and left her with a titanium rod, a permanent limp, and a level of physical pain that she refused to let any human being ever witness. She was the CEO of Marsh Capital Group, a private equity firm worth $4.7 billion. Her photograph had appeared on the cover of Forbes twice. The financial press called her the Iron Empress. The people who worked for her called her something far less flattering when they thought she wasn't listening. She had heard every word. She simply didn't care. Or at least that was what she had spent 20 years perfecting. The look, the posture, the voice that could freeze a boardroom from across a conference table. The absolute refusal to let anyone close enough to see that underneath every layer of power and money and controlled silence. Caroline Marsh was exhausted. She stood at the gate. Or rather, she stood with one hand gripping the back of a seat bearing weight she wasn't supposed to bear because she had left her cane in the company car, and she would rather grind her teeth to dust than ask the woman at the check-in counter for a wheelchair. That was when her phone rang. She already knew who it was before she looked. Marcus. She answered without greeting. Marcus Vane. Her business partner of 11 years. The man who had helped her build Marsh Capital from a mid-size firm into an international force. The man who had shaken her hand over a conference table in 2013 and said, "I believe in what you're building, Caroline. I'm with you." The man who had spent the last 6 months trying to steal it from her. "Where are you?" His voice was flat. No warmth. It had been a long time since there was warmth. Delayed. O'Hare. Same as everyone. The Alderman Group is expecting signatures by Friday. You know that. I know what day it is, Marcus. Do you know what happens if you walk away from this merger? His voice dropped. Not softer. Colder. I have 3 board members who will vote to remove you if you don't sign. 3. I only need 2. Caroline's jaw tightened. Her right leg was sending signals her brain was trying to ignore. You've been busy. I've been patient, he said. 11 years patient. But this merger is happening, Caroline. With or without your signature. The only question is whether you're standing beside me when it closes or whether you're watching it from the outside. Are you threatening me? I'm informing you. A pause. I'll be at the airport in 40 minutes. He ended the call. Caroline stood very still for a moment. The gate area hummed around her. A child was crying somewhere. A man in a business suit was shouting into his phone about a connection he'd missed. A flight attendant was trying to manage a crowd near the desk. She closed her eyes. The Alderman merger was not a business deal. She had known that for months. It was a trap, a carefully designed legal structure that would give Marcus majority operational control while keeping Caroline's name on the letterhead as political cover. She had read every page. She had hired 3 separate attorneys to read every page. The conclusion was the same each time. Sign this, and you hand him everything. Don't sign, and he burns you to the ground. She opened her eyes. She needed to sit. Her leg was past the point of being ignored. Now it was a fire that ran from her hip to her ankle, and the only thing keeping her upright was stubbornness and the back of a plastic airport chair. She made it 6 steps before it gave out. Not dramatically, not with a scream. That wasn't how these things happened. The leg simply stopped cooperating the way it did when she pushed too hard for too long, and Caroline Marsh, CEO Forbes cover Iron Empress, went down hard onto the cold terminal floor. Her phone skidded. Her bag went sideways. And for one long, awful second, she just sat there on the ground surrounded by strangers, and not a single one of them moved. People looked. Of course they looked. Several of them raised their phones. One woman actually said out loud to the man beside her, "Oh, isn't that the woman from the news? The one with the company?" And still, nobody moved. Caroline pressed her palm to the floor, trying to push herself up. Her leg wasn't going to cooperate. She knew that. She'd been here before in private, alone in her own apartment at midnight, when the pain got ahead of her medication, and she had to drag herself to the bedroom wall and use it like scaffolding. She had never been here in public. She had never in 20 years let anyone see her on the floor. She was reaching for her bag when she heard him. "Get your hands off her property." The voice was calm. Not loud, not aggressive, just absolutely certain. She looked up. Marcus Vane had arrived early. He was standing over her with 2 of his attorneys flanking him like architecture, and his face had the particular look it always wore when he had already decided how something was going to end. He'd kicked her bag. That was what had happened. She hadn't registered it at the time she'd been focused on the fall, but he had walked up while she was down and kicked her bag further out of her reach. 11 years. And that was who he was. Caroline. He crouched down not to help her, to be at eye level. "This is embarrassing. For both of us. Let me help you up and we'll go somewhere private and finish this conversation like adults." "Don't touch me. You're on the floor of an airport." "I'm aware. You need help. Not from you." His expression flickered. "Caroline, I said, don't touch me, Marcus." He reached for her arm anyway. And that was when the voice came from her left. "Hey," one word, flat and quiet. But it landed like a door closing. Marcus looked up. Caroline turned her head. The man standing 4 feet away was nobody she would have looked at twice under any other circumstances. Late 30s, maybe early 40s. Work clothes, not the kind people wear to look rugged, the kind people wear because they actually work. Jeans worn pale at both knees. Boots that had seen 10,000 job sites. A canvas jacket with a small logo on the chest she couldn't read from where she sat. He was holding the hand of a little girl. The girl was 7, maybe 8, with her father's same dark eyes and a blue backpack shaped like a turtle on her back. She was looking at Caroline with an expression of total, uncomplicated concern, the way children look at things before the world teaches them that looking costs something. The man wasn't looking at Caroline. He was looking at Marcus. "She said don't touch her," the man said. Marcus straightened up slowly, doing the calculation that men like him always do when they encounter men like this, the one where they measure clothes and posture and determine how seriously to take the interruption. "This is a private conversation," Marcus said. "It stopped being private when you kicked her bag." Marcus blinked. "Excuse me. I watched you do it." The man's voice hadn't changed. Same flat, certain register. "She was on the floor. You walked up and you kicked her bag further away. I watched you do that." He paused. "You want to explain that to me?" "I don't need to explain anything to you." Marcus looked at him the way he looked at people he'd already dismissed. "Who are you? Someone who's going to stand right here until she's able to get up on her own, or until someone who isn't you helps her?" He glanced down at the little girl beside him. "Stay right with me, Rosie." "Okay, Daddy," the girl said. She hadn't stopped looking at Caroline. Marcus turned back to Caroline with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Not anger. Something thinner than anger. Calculation interrupted. "Caroline." His voice had gone quiet. Executive quiet, the kind he used in closed rooms when he wanted to remind people what he was capable of. "You're making a scene. I'm going to help you up. We're going to move away from these people, and we're going to have a rational. She doesn't want your help." The man took one step forward. Just one. "That's not a complicated sentence. I'm going to ask you one more time to stay out of this. And I'm going to stand here either way." The two men looked at each other for a long moment. And something happened that Caroline had almost never witnessed in 20 years of corporate warfare. Marcus Vane blinked first. It wasn't surrender. Men like Marcus didn't surrender. But there were people gathering now watching, and Marcus had spent his entire career as a man who controlled how he was perceived, and the optics of this moment were catastrophically bad and getting worse. He straightened his jacket. "We'll finish this Friday," he said to Caroline. The attorney voice, cold and final. "You have until 9 a.m. He walked away. His attorneys followed. The terminal noise slowly came back up around the space they'd occupied. Caroline sat on the floor and breathed. In through her nose, out through her mouth. The way her physical therapist had taught her. The way she had practiced alone in her apartment, when the pain made her feel like she was going to fracture from the inside. "Can I help you up?" She looked at him. He was still standing there, not hovering, not crowding her. He'd taken a small step back, giving her room, which was not what most people did. Most people moved in when someone was vulnerable, drawn by something they probably didn't even understand in themselves. This man had moved back. "I don't need," she started. "I've got a daughter," he said simply. "I know what it looks like when someone says they don't need help because they're not used to asking for it. I'm not going anywhere either way. Take your time." Caroline looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at the little girl, Rosie, who was watching her with those quiet, dark eyes, backpack straps clutched in both hands. "Why is nobody helping her daddy?" the girl had said. Caroline realized she must have said it earlier before the man stepped forward. She hadn't registered it at the time. She reached out and accepted his hand. He was strong, not showy about it, just solid and certain in the way he helped her up, bearing her weight without comment, angling himself so she could find her balance before he let go. He picked up her bag, handed it to her without being asked. "Your cane," he said. "I don't have it with me." He nodded. No lecture, no expression of concern that would require her to manage his feelings about her situation. "There's seating about 30 feet that way. Less traffic." He nodded in the direction. "You want me to walk with you, or would you rather—" "I'm fine," she said. "Okay." He started to turn back to his daughter. "Wait." He stopped. Caroline Marsh had spent 20 years not saying thank you. Not because she was ungrateful, but because gratitude implied debt, and debt implied vulnerability, and vulnerability had always felt like a door she couldn't afford to leave open. She said it anyway. "Thank you." He looked at her. A simple look. Not proud of himself. Not waiting for something. "Nobody should be on the floor alone," he said. "That's all." He took his daughter's hand. "Come on, Rosybug. Let's find some dinner before your grandma starts calling." "Can we get the pretzels?" "Yeah, we can get the pretzels." They walked away. Caroline stood in the middle of the terminal with her bag in her hand and her leg on fire, and 500 people moving around her like water around a stone, and she watched a man in worn-out boots and a little girl with a turtle backpack disappear into the crowd, and she felt something she had not felt in so long that it took her almost a full minute to identify it. She felt like a human being, not an executive, not a liability, not a target. Just a person who had been helped up off the floor by someone who wanted absolutely nothing in return. She didn't know his name. She didn't know that their flight, his delayed connection to Milwaukee, and her rerouted red-eye to New York would both get canceled within the hour. She didn't know that by midnight, she would be sitting in the back of his truck in a parking garage because he'd noticed she was still limping badly and offered to get her luggage to a cab without her having to walk the full terminal. She didn't know that the cab would never come. She didn't know that he would say quietly, practically, There's a couch at my place if you need somewhere to wait out the storm and figure out your next move, and that she, Victoria Marsh, CEO of a $4.7 billion empire, would say yes. She didn't know any of that yet. She only knew that for the first time and as long as she could remember, someone had stood between her and the thing that was hurting her, and he hadn't asked for a single thing. That kind of man, she thought, watching the space where he'd been, doesn't exist in my world. She was right. He didn't exist in her world, which meant maybe she had been living in the wrong one. His name was Daniel Carr. She found that out in the elevator of the parking garage when his phone rang and the screen lit up with a contact labeled, "Mom, don't ignore this one." And he glanced at it and said almost to himself, "I gotta take this." And then answered with, "Hey Mom, yeah, we're still at the airport. The storm." And then paused for 3 full seconds while the voice on the other end said something Caroline couldn't hear, and he closed his eyes briefly and said, "Mom, I know. I'll call you when we're moving. Tell Rosie's grandma she's fine." And then he hung up and looked at Caroline with an expression that was half apology and half exhaustion and said, "My mother worries." "I gathered," Caroline said. "She thinks airports are where bad things happen to people." She's not entirely wrong. He almost smiled at that. Not quite, but almost. His truck was a 10-year-old Ford F250 with a cracked dashboard and a back seat that was mostly organized chaos, a child's book bag, a folded drop cloth that smelled like paint and sawdust, 2 juice boxes and a small stuffed rabbit that Rosie retrieved immediately and clutched against her chest, with the gravity of someone recovering a critical document. "That's Gerald," Rosie told Caroline very seriously as Daniel loaded the last of the luggage. "Gerald," Caroline repeated. "He doesn't like loud storms, so I have to hold him." "That seems responsible of you." Rosie nodded. "Daddy says when someone is scared, you don't tell them not to be scared. You just stay with them." Caroline looked at the back of Daniel's head through the rear window. He was securing something in the truck bed, his jacket collar up against the wind, moving with the calm efficiency of someone who had learned that most problems got solved faster if you just kept moving. "Your daddy's right," Caroline said. The original plan, such as it was, had been simple. Daniel would drive her to the cab pickup zone on the lower level, she would get a car to a hotel, and that would be the end of a very strange evening. But the storm had made different arrangements. 3 different car services showed wait times of over 2 hours. The hotels within reasonable distance were either fully booked or charging emergency rates that even Caroline found aggressive. And her assistant, the one person whose entire job was solving exactly this kind of logistical problem, was unreachable because it was nearly midnight and the poor woman had a newborn. Daniel had pulled up the hotel situation on his phone, looked at it for about 4 seconds, and then said, "Okay, here's what I can offer. I live 40 minutes from here. It's not fancy. But there's a couch, there's heat, and Rosie's school is canceled tomorrow, so nobody's on a schedule." He looked at her directly. "I'm not trying to complicate your life. I'm just trying to solve a practical problem." Caroline had been about to say no. She knew the shape of that sentence. She had said it 1,000 times, in 1,000 different configurations. "No, I don't need help. No, I'm handling it. No, thank you. I've managed this far on my own." It was the sentence that had kept her safe and kept her alone in equal measure for 2 decades, and she had made her peace with the trade-off a long time ago. Except that she was 43 years old, and she was sitting in a parking garage in a storm with her leg at a 7.5 on the pain scale and her whole professional world on a countdown clock, and a little girl was looking at her with an expression of uncomplicated kindness that Caroline genuinely did not know how to process. "One night," Caroline said. "One night." Daniel agreed. No strings. He wasn't kidding about the 40 minutes. She spent most of it in the passenger seat, watching rain move sideways across the windshield, while Daniel drove with one hand on the wheel and answered Rosie's questions from the back seat, with the kind of patient full-sentence answers that most adults reserved for other adults. When Rosie asked why the sky made noise during storms, he didn't say because of lightning go to sleep. He said, "You know how when you clap really fast it makes a sharp sound? Lightning moves so fast through the air that the air itself kind of claps. That sound is thunder. And Rosie said, so the sky is clapping. And Daniel said, every single time. Caroline turned and looked out the passenger window so he wouldn't see her face. The house was a narrow two-story on a block of similar houses in a neighborhood that was somewhere in the long process of deciding what it wanted to become. Some houses had fresh paint. Some had boarded windows. Daniel's was somewhere in between. The porch railing was new, she could tell by the color, but the front steps were original, and the garden beds along the front walk had been recently turned, even if they hadn't been planted yet. He worked on houses. He was working on his own. Inside was warmer than she expected, not just temperature. The walls of the entry hallway had children's drawings taped at a child's height, not framed, not arranged, just taped. The way things get taped when a kid brings them home from school and a parent doesn't want to make them wait. There was a coat rack with 3 hooks. One held Daniel's other jacket. One held a small pink raincoat. The third was empty. She noticed that. The empty hook. He showed her the couch long enough to be a real option with a pillow and a blanket already materialized from somewhere before she even asked, and then disappeared briefly to get Rosie settled. Caroline could hear them from the living room. Not the words, just the sound. A low voice. A higher voice. Laughter at something. Then quiet. He came back 20 minutes later in a different shirt carrying 2 mugs. Tea or coffee puts me to sleep, he said, setting one on the end table near her. This is just hot water with lemon and honey. My grandmother's cure for everything. Does it work? It doesn't make anything worse. He sat in the armchair across the room, wrapped both hands around his mug. How's the leg? She had been shifting her weight carefully for the last hour, trying to find a position that kept the pain at a manageable level. She hadn't thought he'd noticed. I've had worse nights, she said. I'm not asking to compare. I'm asking because I've got ibuprofen and a heating pad, and you're welcome to both. She looked at him. Most people, when they offered something, wore the offer on their face. They wanted acknowledgement. They wanted to feel like the good person in the room. It wasn't malicious, it was just human, but it always made Caroline feel like a transaction. Daniel's face said he was asking because the information was practical, and the answer would determine the next 10 seconds of his evening. Nothing more. The heating pad, she said. Yes, thank you. He nodded and got up. When he came back and handed it to her, already warm, already wrapped in a pillowcase, she said, You do this a lot. Take in strangers. First time, he said, sitting back down. You, being taken in. Yeah, also first time. She settled the heating pad against her hip. I'm usually better prepared. For storms. For everything. She paused. I don't travel without my cane. I don't get caught without a car. I don't... She stopped. I don't end up on the floor of airports. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then, he planned that. The man from the airport. It wasn't a question. Probably, she said. The timing. Catching you without your cane, without a car arranged. In public. Marcus is thorough, she said, and there was something in her voice when she said his name, not fear exactly. Something more like what you feel when you recognize a dangerous thing you've been standing next to for a very long time without fully understanding how dangerous it was. Is he your business partner? She said. 11 years. Daniel nodded slowly. That's a long time. It's a long time. What does he want? My company. She said it plainly, the way she had not been able to say it out loud to anyone. Not her attorneys, not her board contact, not her sister, who called twice a month from Seattle and always somehow made these conversations about herself. He's built a legal structure around a merger that would give him majority operational control. He needs my signature. I've been delaying for 3 months. And now he's done being patient. Now he's done being patient. Daniel looked into his mug for a moment. What happens if you don't sign? He has the board votes to remove me as CEO. And if you do sign, I keep the title. She met his eyes. and I lose everything that made it worth having." The room was quiet, except for the rain against the windows and the sound of the heating pad doing its slow, reliable work. "I'm sorry," Daniel said. "Just that. No advice, no tactical suggestions, no 'have you tried' or 'what if you'? Just an acknowledgement that the thing she was carrying was heavy. She hadn't realized until that moment how much she needed someone to just say that. "Your daughter," she said after a while, changing the subject because she needed to before something cracked open that she wasn't ready to deal with. "Rosie, she's—" She searched for the right word and landed on honest. "She's extraordinary." Something moved across Daniel's face. Warmth, and something older than warmth. "Yeah," he said quietly. "She is. She talks to adults like they're people. I told her they usually are." "That's optimistic. She's 7. I've got time to calibrate." He smiled, and it was the first full smile she'd seen from him, and it changed his face completely. Made him look younger, and a little unguarded, and entirely genuine. Her mother was the same way, just walked into a room and made everyone feel like they'd been seen. Past tense. Caroline registered it without asking. She didn't have to. "Emma passed 4 years ago," he said, reading the silence. "Cancer. Rosie was 3. She doesn't remember much, but she's got all her mom's instincts." He paused. "Sometimes that's the hardest part. Watching her do something Emma used to do, like reaching for a stranger's hand." Caroline thought of Rosie at the airport, the way she'd looked at her from behind her father's arm. Not afraid, not performing concern, just present. "How do you do it?" she asked. "Work, raise her alone, keep—" She gestured vaguely. "All of this." "Some days better than others," Daniel said. "Mostly I just try to show up, even when showing up is the hardest thing." He looked at her. "What about you, who shows up for you?" The question landed somewhere tender. "I have a team," she said. "That's not what I asked." She didn't answer, which was its own answer. He didn't push. He just nodded the way people nod when they've heard something they already suspected. They sat there for a while longer, not talking, not filling the silence with noise, the way people usually did when they were uncomfortable. Just 2 people in a warm room while a storm moved through the city, each carrying more than they'd arrived with, and for the first time in a long time, not having to pretend otherwise. When Caroline finally said she should try to sleep, Daniel stood and took the mugs without being asked and said, "Bathroom's the second door on the left, towels on the shelf. Rosie's school stuff is on the counter, but just push it aside." He said it all matter-of-factly, like she was a person who deserved to be in his home, like this was the most normal thing in the world. "Daniel." He stopped at the entrance to the hallway. "Why did you step in?" she asked. "At the airport. Most people—" She paused. "Most people filmed it." He looked at her for a moment, and she couldn't tell in the low light what he was thinking. Something careful, something real. "Rosie asked me why nobody was helping," he said, "and I didn't have a good answer for her." He shrugged. "I'm not going to teach my kid that you look away when someone's on the floor. I don't care who they are." He said goodnight and walked down the hall. Caroline lay down on the couch and stared at the ceiling and listened to the rain. She was in a stranger's house in Chicago with a heating pad on her hip and a merger deadline on Friday, and a business partner who had kicked her bag away from her on an airport floor, and she had $4.7 billion, and she did not know a single human being who would have stepped in front of Marcus Vane in a crowded terminal for no reason, except that a child had asked why nobody was helping. She thought about the empty hook on the coat rack. She thought about Emma, who had walked into rooms and made people feel seen. She thought about Rosie, who had inherited that from a mother she barely remembered, and who had given it away freely to a stranger on a cold floor without asking for a single thing back. She thought about what Daniel had said. "I don't care who they are." Not, "I didn't know who she was." Not, "I would have done it for anyone." Just the simplest possible version of the truth. It didn't matter who she was. She was a person. That was enough. Carolyn Marsh had spent 20 years making sure people knew exactly who she was, exactly how much she was worth. exactly how dangerous it was to underestimate her. And tonight, the only person who had treated her like she mattered was a man who had no idea what she was worth and clearly did not intend to find out. She closed her eyes. Outside, the storm was finally starting to thin. She could tell by the way the rain shifted from the hard driving kind to something quieter. The kind that didn't fight anymore. The kind that just fell. She was asleep before she finished the thought. She did not dream about the merger. She dreamed about a coat rack with 3 hooks and a small pink raincoat and a third hook that was no longer empty. She woke up the next morning to the smell of coffee and the sound of a 7-year-old asking someone named Gerald if he was feeling better now that the storm had passed, and for the first time in longer than she could account for. Caroline Marsh did not reach immediately for her phone. She just lay there and breathed and let the morning be exactly what it was. She had meant to leave that morning. That had been the plan. Wake up, call a car, get to a hotel, get back to work. The storm was over. The airports were reopening. There was no reason, no logical, professional, defensible reason for Caroline Marsh to still be sitting at a stranger's kitchen table at 8:15 in the morning, eating pancakes with a 7-year-old who was explaining the social dynamics of her second-grade class with the analytical precision of a UN diplomat. "Jalen says he doesn't like me," Rosie was saying very seriously, cutting her pancake into exact triangles. "But he saved me a seat on Tuesday, so I think he just doesn't know yet." "Doesn't know what?" Caroline asked. "That he likes me." Rosie said it the way people state obvious facts like the direction of gravity. Sometimes people don't know what they feel yet. Daddy says you have to give them time to catch up to themselves. Caroline looked across the kitchen at Daniel, who was at the counter with his back to them, pouring coffee, and who had very clearly heard every word his daughter just said, and was doing an excellent job of pretending he hadn't. "Your daddy says a lot of things," Caroline said. "He reads a lot," Rosie confirmed. "And he thinks out loud when he's working. I learned almost everything from listening to him think out loud." Daniel set a mug in front of Caroline and sat down. "She's not wrong," he said mildly. "Probably should have been more careful about what I thought out loud when she was a toddler." "You said a bad word once when you hit your thumb with a hammer," Rosie said. "We agreed not to talk about that." "I'm just saying it was very educational," Caroline laughed. Not a polished laugh, not the controlled social laugh she deployed at fundraisers and board dinners. A real one, sudden and unguarded, and it surprised her so much that she pressed her fingers to her mouth for a second afterward, as if she could put it back. Daniel noticed. He didn't say anything. He just looked at her with a quiet expression. She was starting to recognize the one that meant he was paying attention without making her feel watched. "I should call a car," she said. "Okay," he said. "I've taken up enough of your Caroline." He said her name simply, not to stop her exactly, just to remind her that he was listening. "You don't have to explain yourself. If you want to go, I'll help you load up. If you need more time, the couch is still there." She looked at him, at Rosie, who had moved on to arranging her pancake triangles into a pattern and was narrating this process quietly to Gerald the rabbit, who was propped against the syrup bottle. "1 more hour," she said. It turned into 3. Daniel had a project call at 9. Something about load-bearing walls and permit approvals that she could hear him handling in the other room with the same calm precision he applied to everything else. And Rosie commandeered Caroline for what she described as a very important activity that turned out to be helping color a poster about the water cycle for a school project that was due. Rosie mentioned maybe Friday or possibly last Wednesday. "Rosie, I lost track of some days. I see that." "You're very good at staying inside the lines," Rosie said, watching Caroline color a cloud. "I've had a lot of practice." "Daddy goes outside the lines. He says the lines are just suggestions." "For coloring, maybe." "He says it for lots of things." Rosie selected a blue marker. "Do you have kids?" "No," Caroline said. "Do you want them?" "Rosie," Daniel said from the doorway. She hadn't heard him finish his call. "It's a normal question," Rosie said. "It's a personal question. Those are the interesting ones." Rosie looked at Caroline with frank curiosity. "You don't have to answer." Caroline set down the marker she was holding. She thought about the question, not deflecting it, not reaching for the standard answer she gave at interviews, when journalists asked some version of the same thing, and she said, "I'm focused on building something that lasts," in a tone that closed the subject permanently. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I never really let myself think about it." Rosie considered this. "That seems lonely," she said. Not cruelly, just observationally, the way children say true things. "Yeah," Caroline said. "It kind of is." Daniel caught her eye over Rosie's head. Something passed between them, not quite pity, not quite recognition. Something more like two people standing on opposite sides of a window and both pressing their hands to the glass at the same time. Her phone rang. She knew before she looked, the way you always know. "I have to take this," she said. She stepped into the hallway, answered. "You stayed in Chicago." Marcus's voice was not surprised. It was something more controlled than surprise. "I assumed you'd run." "I don't run." "No, you delay." She heard him exhale, the particular exhale of a man reordering a strategy. "I've been patient with you, Caroline. You know that. You've been strategic with me. That's different. Friday is in 3 days. I'm in the city. We should meet." "No." A pause. "No. I said what I said, Marcus. You understand what I'll do." Not a question. Not a threat dressed up as something softer. Just a statement of fact delivered with the precision of someone who had rehearsed it. The board, the press. There's a journalist at the Tribune who has been very interested in the circumstances around the Pleaded acquisition 3 years ago. I've been very careful not to encourage her. Caroline's jaw tightened. The Pleaded acquisition was clean. She knew it was clean. Her lawyers knew it was clean, but clean and expensive to defend publicly were two entirely different things, and Marcus knew exactly how much that distinction cost. "You'll destroy your own reputation to get what you want," she said. "I'll do what's necessary." "That's not partnership, Marcus. That's extortion. Call it whatever you want." His voice was steady, and that steadiness was the most frightening thing about him. Not rage, never rage, just this permanent functional calm. "I'm at the Langham. Come tonight. Bring your attorneys. Let's close this." He hung up. Caroline stood in the hallway with her phone in her hand, and the pancake sounds still coming from the kitchen, and Rosie's voice floating through the wall, saying something about the ocean being too blue, and Daniel saying the ocean is pretty blue though, and Rosie saying, "Not this blue, Daddy." She stood there for a long moment, then she walked back into the kitchen. Daniel looked up at her face and read it immediately. Not dramatically, not with alarm, just a quiet recognition that something had shifted. "Bad," he said. "He's in the city," she said. "He wants to meet tonight." "Are you going?" "I don't know yet." Rosie had looked up from the poster. She was watching Caroline with those careful eyes, not intruding, just present, witnessing. "Can I ask you something?" Caroline said to Daniel. "Yeah. The merger, the one I told you about last night." She sat back down at the table. "If I sign it, my employees keep their jobs. All 400 of them. Benefits, salaries, the whole structure stays intact. Marcus has promised that." "Do you believe him?" She paused. "No." "Then it doesn't matter what he's promised. It matters to 400 people. It matters to what he's told 400 people," Daniel said. "That's not the same thing." He leaned forward, elbows on the table, voice even. "Caroline, I renovate houses. I'm not a finance guy. But I know what it looks like when someone uses other people as leverage to get what they want. And I know that the second you sign something you know is wrong because you're afraid of what someone will do if you don't." He stopped. "You've already lost. You've just made it official." The room was very quiet. "She's choosing?" Rosie said. Both adults turned to look at her. Rosie had gone back to her poster. She said it without looking up, in the same conversational tone she used for everything, as if it were simply a thing that needed to be said, and she was the one available to say it. "What?" Caroline said. "You said you don't know what to do. But you do know. You just don't want to do it yet. Rosie selected a green marker. That's not the same as not knowing. Daddy calls that the gap between knowing and choosing. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. I really do think too loud. But Caroline was looking at Rosie with an expression she couldn't entirely control. Because the girl was right. She had known, not last night, not this morning. She had known for 3 months. She had known the moment her third attorney confirmed what the first two had already told her. She had known sitting in her office at midnight reading the merger documents for the 4th time, looking for a version of them that didn't exist. She knew. She just hadn't chosen yet. Her phone buzzed. A text from her assistant. The new numbers Marcus had apparently already moved, pulling funding from a subsidiary account that was technically accessible to him under the current partnership structure. A warning shot. Small enough to be deniable. Large enough to be unmistakable. She showed it to Daniel. He read it. Set the phone down. He's not going to wait, he said. No. So what do you need to do today? She thought about it. Really thought about it not as a CEO running a calculation, but as a person trying to figure out what the next honest step was. I need to call my attorney, she said. The one Marcus doesn't know about. Daniel nodded. Use the back porch. It's quiet. She was on the phone for 1 hour and 40 minutes. When she came back inside, Daniel was under the kitchen sink fixing something that had apparently been dripping, and Rosie was at the table cutting shapes out of construction paper with a focus that suggested a project of significant importance. Well, Daniel said, not looking up from the cabinet. There's a path, Caroline said. It's not clean, it's not fast, and it requires me to go on the record about some things Marcus did in 2021 that I've been sitting on for 2 years because I kept thinking... She stopped. I kept thinking I could manage it internally. But you can't. Not anymore. She sat down. If I go to the board directly, not through Marcus directly with the documentation I have, there's a case for breach of fiduciary duty. It doesn't guarantee anything, but it changes the conversation. What does Marcus do when you make that move? Everything he threatened, the journalist, the press, the Leland acquisition story, which is garbage but will take 8 months and a lot of money to prove is garbage. She met his eyes. It gets ugly, but you're still the one who decided. She absorbed that. But I'm still the one who decided. Daniel pulled himself out from under the cabinet and sat on the kitchen floor, which was apparently a thing he did without self-consciousness, and looked up at her from that angle. I had a client once, he said, who wanted me to fix a structural crack in her foundation. I told her the fix was going to require pulling up part of her kitchen floor. She said, can't we just fill it? I said, filling it'll hold for maybe 2 years, and then you've got the same problem and a worse version of it. He shrugged. She didn't want to hear it. But 3 years later she called me back. Floor had caved in. Cost her 3 times as much. You're saying I've been filling the crack. I'm saying you already know you've been filling the crack. Rosie looked up from her construction paper. What crack? She said. Grown-up stuff, Rosebug. Is Caroline's house broken? Something like that, Caroline said. But I think I know how to fix it. Rosie nodded with great seriousness. Daddy can fix almost anything, she said. Except the dishwasher. That one's personal. It's a grudge match at this point, Daniel confirmed. Caroline smiled, and this time she didn't try to put it back. She spent the rest of the afternoon at Daniel's kitchen table with her laptop and 3 different legal documents, and her attorney on a voice call that she kept having to pause because Rosie would walk through with questions. Not questions about the documents, just questions. The way children generate them constantly about why clouds were that shape and whether Gerald would like living somewhere warmer and what Caroline's favorite color was. Blue, Caroline said without thinking. I knew it, Rosie said with tremendous satisfaction and went back to whatever she was building. At 4:30, a car pulled up in front of the house. Caroline heard it before she saw it. A specific kind of car, she knew the sound of a high-end sedan engine, had spent enough years in them, to recognize the particular quiet of a vehicle that cost more than some people's houses. Daniel was at the front window first. "You know that car," he said. Caroline was already standing. She knew the car because it was her company car, which meant Marcus had access to the company GPS log and had found her location, which meant he had used resources he was not authorized to use for personal tracking, which was her attorney's voice was already in her head. Actually very useful information to have on record. "Don't open the door," she said. "I wasn't going to." The knock came anyway. 3 sharp knocks. The kind designed to communicate that the person doing the knocking was not accustomed to waiting. Rosie appeared in the hallway. "Someone's here," she announced. "Go to your room for a few minutes, okay?" Daniel said. Something in his voice made Rosie not argue. She went. Daniel looked at Caroline. "Tell me what you need." The knock came again. "I need to not do this alone," she said. She hadn't planned to say it. It came out before the filter caught it unprocessed, unarmored, just true. Daniel nodded once. He walked to the front door and opened it. Marcus Vane stood on the porch in a coat that cost more than Daniel's truck, with 2 attorneys behind him like shadows. He looked at Daniel for exactly 1 second, the measuring look same as the airport, and then looked past him at Caroline. "There you are," Marcus said. "You tracked the company car?" Caroline said. "That's going to be a problem for you later. We need to talk. We have nothing to talk about until Friday." "Friday is a courtesy, Caroline. You know that." He looked at Daniel again, longer this time. "Who is this?" "This is my house," Daniel said. Marcus smiled the particular smile of a man who considered himself infinitely patient with things that didn't matter. "I'm not here to talk to you. I'm here for Caroline." "She's here," Daniel said. "She's choosing to stand in my doorway instead of talking to you. So I think you have your answer for tonight." Marcus looked at Daniel the way he had at the airport, like a man deciding whether an obstacle was worth the effort of removing. And then he looked at Caroline, and the smile changed into something that wasn't a smile at all. "You're making a mistake," he said. "You're making it in front of a witness, which is either brave or stupid, and I haven't decided which." "Add it to the list of things you haven't decided," Caroline said. He looked at her for a long moment. At her, not through her, not past her. And for the first time in 11 years, she did not look away. "Friday," he said finally. "Good night, Marcus." He turned and walked back to the car. The attorneys followed. The door of the high-end sedan closed with that expensive airtight sound. Daniel stepped back inside and closed the front door. The 2 of them stood in the entry hallway without speaking for a moment. Then Rosie's voice came from the top of the stairs. "Is the scary man gone?" Daniel looked up. "Yeah, Rosie Bug. He's gone." A pause. Was Caroline brave? Daniel glanced at Caroline, something warm in his face, something that had no agenda behind it at all. "Yeah," he said quietly. She really was. Caroline stood in a stranger's hallway in a house that smelled like coffee and sawdust, and something that might have been cinnamon, and she felt the thing that had been locked inside her sternum for 11 years, or maybe 43 years, maybe her whole life shift. Not break open, not dissolve, just move, like something that had been frozen, remembering slowly that it knew how to thaw. She didn't cry, but it was a near thing. Dinner, Daniel said. Practical, warm, completely ordinary. "Yes," she said, and she meant it more than she had meant anything in a very long time. Dinner that night was pasta, not catered pasta, not restaurant pasta delivered in branded containers by someone whose job it was to anticipate her needs. Pasta made from a box on a gas stove in a kitchen, where the backsplash tile had one missing piece near the left burner, made by a man who cooked the way he did everything else, without performance, without apology, just steadily and well. Rosie set the table. She did it with the focused ceremony of someone who considered table setting a serious art form. Napkins folded into rough triangles, forks placed with intention, a small jar of wildflowers in the center that she retrieved from the windowsill and repositioned 3 times until she was satisfied. She does this every night, Caroline asked quietly, watching from the doorway. Every night she's home, Daniel said, stirring. Started after Emma died. I think she needed something to be in charge of. Caroline watched Rosie move the flower jar one final centimeter to the left and step back to assess. Smart kid, Caroline said. Terrifying kid, Daniel said with complete affection. They ate. Rosie talked about Gerald's feelings regarding pasta, favorable about a girl in her class who had gotten a hamster, and whether hamsters were better than rabbits, they were not. Rosie clarified, not even close, about whether the crack in the ceiling above the table was shaped more like a river or a lightning bolt. River, Daniel said. Lightning bolt, Caroline said. Rosie looked between them with great satisfaction, as if she had engineered this disagreement deliberately. I think it's a dragon, she said. After dinner, after Rosie was in bed, a process that involved 2 stories, 1 glass of water, a renegotiation of blanket arrangement, and Gerald being repositioned 4 times, Daniel came back downstairs and found Caroline at the kitchen table, with her laptop open and 3 browser tabs running and a yellow legal pad covered in her own handwriting. He sat down across from her. You're not sleeping, he said. I sleep 4 hours a night. I always have. That's not sleeping, that's surviving. She looked up. What's the difference? About 4 hours, he said. She almost smiled. Almost. I'm building the board presentation. If I'm going to go directly to the board members I trust, and I use that word loosely, I need to have everything organized before Friday. Every document, every timestamp, every instance of Marcus exceeding his authorized access. How many instances? 14 confirmed. Possibly more. She tapped her pen against the legal pad. The problem is that 6 of those board members are people Marcus cultivated carefully over the last 3 years. I need the other 6 to move first and move fast. If they don't present a unified front before he gets to control the narrative, he poisons the well, Daniel said. She looked at him. Yes, exactly. I've seen it, he said. Not in boardrooms, in neighborhoods. When a developer wants a block and the homeowners are divided, he gets to the ones who are scared first, offers them just enough to make the others look unreasonable for holding out. He paused. The ones who hold out together are the only ones who get a fair deal. The ones who go alone get eaten. Caroline set her pen down. You're describing a corporate hostile takeover using the metaphor of real estate development. I'm describing how power works when someone wants something that isn't theirs, he said simply. The setting changes. The move doesn't. She stared at him for a moment. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? I don't know. Someone simpler. He raised an eyebrow, not offended, mildly entertained. I mean that as a confession, not an insult, she said quickly. I categorize people. It's a professional habit and a personal flaw. You were in my initial read a working-class man who did a kind thing at an airport. I put you in a box. And now, she considered the question honestly. Now I think the box was the problem, not you. He was quiet for a moment. Then, what box do you put yourself in? The question surprised her. She opened her mouth, closed it. CEO, she said finally. Damaged. Dangerous to get close to. She said it without drama, just inventory. That's the box I've been living in for 20 years. Who built it? My father, mostly. Then I took over construction. She picked up her pen again. He ran the company before me. He was effective, cold, the kind of man who corrected your grammar at the dinner table and called it love. She paused. When I took over at 31, everyone expected me to fail. I decided they would never get the satisfaction, so I out-colded him, outdistanced everyone, made myself untouchable. Did it work? Professionally, yes, completely. She looked at the legal pad. Personally, she stopped. I don't have a personal. You're sitting in my kitchen at 11 o'clock at night helping me eat box pasta, Daniel said. That's personal. She looked up at him. And something shifted in her expression, not dramatic, not sudden. The slow way ice changes at the edge of a warm season, Daniel. You don't have to say anything. he said. I'm not trying to make this into something it isn't. I just want you to know that you're allowed to have a kitchen to sit in, that's all. He paused. You're allowed to be a person. She looked at him for a long moment. Long enough that the refrigerator hum became audible, and the streetlight outside shifted through the window, and Gerald the rabbit forgotten on the counter seemed to observe the moment with appropriate gravity. Your daughter told me you think out loud when you work, she said finally. She tells everyone that. She's right, isn't she? You're doing it now. Probably, he said. What are you thinking? He was quiet for a few seconds. Then, that you've been carrying this alone for so long that you've forgotten carrying it isn't mandatory. He met her eyes. That's all. She didn't answer, but she also didn't look away. They worked in parallel. After that, Caroline on her board presentation, Daniel on a project timeline for a renovation that was running 3 weeks behind schedule. Both of them quiet in the way that people are quiet when the silence has become comfortable instead of awkward. Twice she asked him something about contracts and leverage, and he answered from his own experience in terms that were practical and clear. Once he asked her to look at a budget discrepancy in his project figures, and she spotted the error in 40 seconds and showed him where the supplier had double billed a materials line. That's $800, she said. I know. You were going to absorb it. I was going to argue it tomorrow. Argue it tonight. Email. She turned his laptop toward him. Send it now. People who send accurate dispute emails at 11 p.m. get taken more seriously than people who call at 9 a.m. It signals you don't need to escalate to get someone's attention. He looked at her. That's 20 years of fighting for table space in rooms full of men who were hoping I'd give up, she said. He sent the email. At 12:30 her phone lit up. A text from her attorney. She read it again. What? Daniel said. Marcus moved on the Leland story. She set the phone face down on the table. The Tribune journalist published an article online an hour ago. Broad implications. No specific allegations yet, but the framing... She stopped. The framing is exactly what he promised. How bad? Bad enough that my phone is going to be on fire by 6 a.m. She pressed both hands flat against the table. He didn't wait for Friday. Because you didn't go to the Langham tonight, Daniel said. He's telling me what happens when I don't comply. She stood up, moved to the window. He's done this before smaller versions. A rumor, a whispered comment to a board member, enough to remind me that he can hurt me without ever touching me directly. She turned. This time it's public. What does your attorney say? That it's aggressive, but probably legal, and that my best response is to move on the board before the story has time to breathe. How long do you have? Realistically, 48 hours before the other board members start calling Marcus instead of me. She looked at him. I need to fly back to New York tomorrow morning. The words sat in the room. Okay, Daniel said. One word. But it held a weight of things unsaid. Not recrimination, not pressure. Just the acknowledgement that something was changing, and he was giving her room to change it. I don't want to leave, she said. She hadn't planned to say that either. It came from the same place the thank you had come from at the airport somewhere below the armor where things were still true and unmanaged. I know, he said. That probably sounds honest, he said. And you don't have to qualify it. She looked at him. At the kitchen that smelled like pasta and coffee and sawdust. At the crack in the ceiling that was either a river or a lightning bolt or a dragon. At the missing tile near the left burner. At the empty hook on the coat rack that she could see from where she stood. Tell me something, she said. Yeah, when your wife died. She said it carefully, knowing she was walking on ground that was not hers, and being as deliberate as she could about it. When you lost Emma, how did you... She stopped, started again. How did you not collapse? Daniel was quiet for a moment, long enough that she thought maybe she'd gone too far. I did collapse, he said. For about 3 weeks after the funeral, I was... He exhaled. I was not functional. My mother came and took Rosie, and I sat in this house, and I was not okay." He paused. "But then one morning, Rosie came back, and she was looking for me, and she didn't call out. She just walked through every room until she found me, and she climbed up next to me on the floor where I was sitting, and she said, 'I found you, Daddy.' Like it was a game, like finding me was the whole point." He stopped, looked at his hands. "And I thought she's going to keep looking for me every day for the rest of her life. I better be somewhere she can find me." The room was very quiet. "So you stayed," Caroline said. "I stayed," he said. "And then slowly I started building again. Because that's what I know how to do. And building kept me present, in my body, in the day." He looked up. "You asked how I didn't collapse. The honest answer is that I did. I just made sure that when I put myself back together, I did it around the things that mattered, instead of around the things that were just impressive." Caroline stood at the window for a long moment. Then she walked to the table and sat down across from him again, and she looked at him with an expression she had spent 20 years making sure no one ever saw. "I've been building around the wrong things," she said. "Yeah," he said gently. "I think you have. The company, the power, none of it." She stopped. "It kept me safe." "But safe from what? From feeling from—" She pressed her fingers to her forehead. "From being on the floor of an airport with nobody to help me up." "But someone did help you up," Daniel said. She met his eyes. "Someone did," she said. In the morning, she booked a 7 a.m. flight. Daniel made coffee before 5 without being asked, and drove her to the airport in the 10-year-old Ford, with the cracked dashboard while Rosie slept. Rosie having been briefed the night before, and having responded to the news of Caroline's departure with a solemnity that made her look exactly like her father. "Will you come back?" Rosie had asked. "I hope so," Caroline had said, and meant it, which was not something she was used to. Hope required vulnerability. Hope required caring about the outcome. She had spent a long time choosing certainty over hope, because certainty at least couldn't disappoint you. "I hope so too," Rosie had said, and then hugged her. Quick and total, the way children hug with their whole body, no reservation. Caroline had held on longer than she intended. At the airport drop-off, Daniel pulled up to the curb and got out and got her bags from the bed of the truck with the same practical efficiency as everything else. He set them down, stood in front of her. "What happens today?" he said. "You know what you need to do." "Yes," she said, "and you're going to do it." She looked at him, thought of Rosie at the kitchen table. That's not the same as not knowing. That's the gap between knowing and choosing. "Yes," she said, "I'm going to do it." He nodded. And then he did something she didn't expect. He reached out and put his hand briefly on her shoulder. Not a hug, not a handshake. Something between the two. The kind of contact that says, "I see you," without requiring anything back. "Call your attorney the second you land," he said. "I will." "And Caroline." She looked at him. "You were already brave before you walked out of my house last night," he said. "You've been brave for a long time. You just weren't pointing it in the right direction." She didn't trust her voice for a moment. "Thank you," she said, "for all of it." "Nobody should be on the floor alone," he said. "Same as the airport. First principles." She picked up her bags, walked through the sliding doors. She didn't look back, not because she didn't want to, but because she knew if she did, she would feel the full weight of what she was walking toward, and she needed all of it to get through the next 48 hours. But she heard it. The truck engine. Pulling away from the curb. Patient and steady and unhurried, the way it did everything. She walked to security. She walked through. She thought about a crack in a ceiling that looked like a dragon. She thought about a little girl who found her father in every room. She thought about an empty hook on a coat rack, and a man who rebuilt things around what mattered, and a kitchen that smelled like something she didn't have a word for yet. By the time she was at the gate, she had her attorney on the phone. By the time she was in the air, the first 2 board members had confirmed a call. By the time she landed at JFK, she had 6. She didn't have the company yet. She didn't have the merger stopped, or Marcus neutralized, or the Tribune story addressed, or her life rebuilt around anything resembling what Daniel had described. Anything that deserved to be called a life, instead of just a performance of one. But she had 6 board members, and she had chosen. And for the first time in 20 years, those 2 things felt like enough to stand on. The board meeting was not clean. Nothing about the next 48 hours was clean. Caroline had known it wouldn't be, had prepared for it not to be, but there is a difference between knowing something will be hard and sitting inside the hardness of it while it happens. She presented to the board on Thursday morning. Not Friday. Not on Marcus's timeline. On hers. She had called an emergency session using a provision in the partnership agreement that Marcus had apparently forgotten existed or had assumed she would never use, because invoking it required her to put every card she held face up on the table in front of people she wasn't certain she could trust. It was the kind of move that only works once. You use it and you win, or you use it and you lose everything. There is no version where you use it and walk away intact if the room goes against you. She used it anyway. She walked in with her attorney beside her and 14 documented instances of unauthorized resource access and 3 years of financial irregularities that she had compiled through a night that involved no sleep and 4 cups of coffee and the memory of Daniel's voice saying the ones who hold out together are the only ones who get a fair deal. She put it all on the table. Marcus was in the room. He had known the meeting was called. He had to be notified that was in the same agreement, and he sat at the far end of the conference table in the suit he wore when he wanted to project absolute confidence, and he watched her arrange her materials with an expression she had seen before. The one that said he was already 3 moves ahead and she was welcome to try. She looked at him once. Just once. Then she looked at the board. "I'm going to show you what this merger actually does," she said. "Not what you were told it does, what it does." She spoke for 40 minutes. No slides, no presentation deck. Just documents and her voice and 20 years of understanding exactly how the numbers in those documents moved and where they were designed to move without anyone noticing. Marcus interrupted twice. His attorney interrupted once. Caroline's attorney shut down each interruption with the precise, unhurried language of someone who had been waiting a long time to deploy it. At the 40-minute mark, Caroline stopped talking and looked at the room. 6 faces were unreadable. 3 were alarmed. 2 were angry, and she could tell from the direction of the anger that it was pointed at the right person. One board member, Gerald Fitch, who was 71 years old, and had known her father and had sat on this board since before Caroline took over, was looking at Marcus with an expression she had never seen on Gerald Fitch's face in 20 years. Betrayal. Marcus saw it too. He leaned forward. His voice was still controlled. She had to give him that he was controlled to the last, and he said, "These are selective documents presented in a misleading context. The merger structure is standard practice for a transaction of this size, and I'm prepared to demonstrate that to any independent." "Gerald." Caroline kept her eyes on Gerald Fitch. "You've known me since I was 22 years old. You told my father I had a sharper mind than he gave me credit for. I've never asked you for anything based on that." She paused. "I'm asking you now. Look at page 31, the operational control clause. Tell me what it says." Gerald put on his glasses, turned to page 31, read it. The room was completely silent. Gerald set the document down. He looked at Marcus over his glasses. "Marcus," he said, in the tone of a man who had made his decision and was simply informing the room of it. "This is not standard practice." It took another 3 hours. There were calls and recesses and an aggressive counter-presentation from Marcus's attorneys, and a moment somewhere around hour 2 where Caroline sat in the hallway outside the conference room and pressed her back against the wall, and breathed in through her nose and out through her mouth, and thought about a heating pad in a living room in Chicago, and a little girl who said, "That's not the same as not knowing." Her attorney came out and sat beside her. "You okay?" "Ask me in an hour," she said. "You're winning," he said quietly. "I've been in these rooms for 30 years. You're winning." "Then why does it feel like this?" Because you're doing it honestly, he said. Honest wins always feel worse than they should. You didn't move anything off the board. You didn't make any deals you'll regret. You just told the truth in a room full of people who needed to hear it. He paused. That's the hardest version. But it's also the only version that holds. She went back in. At 6:15 p.m. on Thursday, the board voted 7-4 to suspend the merger, pending an independent audit of Marcus Vane's authorization records over the preceding 3 years. It was not a complete victory. It was the beginning of what would become a complete victory. A process that would take 5 more months and 3 regulatory reviews and 1 very thorough Tribune journalist who once pointed toward the actual story turned out to be far more interested in Marcus's documented misconduct than in the insinuations he'd fed her about the Leland acquisition. But in that room at 6:15, when the vote came in at 7-4, something happened to Caroline Marsh's face that her attorney would describe later to his wife as the most unexpectedly moving thing he'd witnessed in 3 decades of corporate law. She didn't celebrate. She just closed her eyes. For about 4 seconds. And whatever she was doing behind those closed eyes, whatever she was processing, whatever she was releasing, it was private and complete and entirely her own. Then she opened them, and she got back to work. She called Daniel from the car on the way back to her apartment. He answered on the second ring. She could hear background noise, something that sounded like power tools distant, and then the sound of a door closing and quiet. "How'd it go?" he said. 7-4, she said. A pause. Then, yeah. Caroline. His voice was warm and certain, and she had heard it enough times now to know that was just how it sounded, not performed, not calibrated, just him. "That's really good." "It's the beginning," she said. "There's still months of—" "I know," he said. "But you started it. You stood up and you started it." She was quiet for a moment, watching the city move past the car window. "I kept thinking about what you said. About building around the things that matter." "Yeah, I think I finally understand what that means." She paused. "I think I've been building around survival for so long that I forgot survival wasn't the point. It was just the minimum requirement to get to the point." "What's the point?" She thought about it, really thought. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "But I think I'm finally in a place where I can find out." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Rosie drew you something." She blinked. "What?" "While you were gone, she drew you a picture. She made me promise not to tell you what it is. She wants to show you herself." A pause. "She's been asking every day when you're coming back." Something warm moved through Caroline's chest. The same thing she'd felt standing in that hallway when Rosie hugged her total and unguarded and completely without conditions. "Tell her I'm coming back," Caroline said. Yeah. She said it with a certainty that surprised even herself. "I need about 2 weeks to get some things stabilized here, and then I'm coming back." "Okay," Daniel said, simple and steady as everything else about him. Daniel. "Yeah. Thank you. For I know I keep saying that. But I don't have a better word for what I mean, and I'd rather say the imprecise thing than say nothing." "What do you mean?" he said. "If it's not thank you." She thought about it. "You made me believe I was worth helping," she said. "Not because of the company or the money or anything I'd built. Just as a person. On a floor." She swallowed. "I hadn't believed that in a very long time." The line was quiet for a moment. "You always were," he said. "You just needed someone to stand still long enough for you to see it." She got back to New York. She got back to work. And over the next 6 weeks, she did something she had not done in 20 years of running a company. She asked for help. Not from attorneys. She had always been willing to hire expertise. She asked for help from people. She called board members she'd kept at arm's length for years and had honest conversations instead of strategic ones. She called her sister in Seattle and did not deflect when her sister asked how she really was. She called her doctor and scheduled appointments she had been postponing for 2 years because attending them meant acknowledging that the leg was something she had to manage instead of something she could simply override with sufficient willpower. She started using her cane. In public. In meetings. Without explanation or apology. The first time she walked into a boardroom with it, one of the newer members, a man she didn't particularly respect, glanced at it. And she met his eyes and held them until he looked away, and then she sat down and opened the meeting and did not think about it again. Afterward, her assistant, who had worked for her for 6 years and maintained professional boundaries with the dedication of a Swiss watchmaker, said quietly, "For what it's worth, you walk into rooms like you own them either way." "I know," Caroline said, and smiled. She went back to Chicago on a Saturday in early December. She took a commercial flight. Coach. She had a car arranged, not a company car, her own, and she drove herself to the narrow 2-story house on the block that was still deciding what it wanted to become. The garden beds along the front walk had been planted since she was last here. She could see that from the car. Small green things, winter hardy, just beginning to show. She knocked. Rosie opened the door before she had finished knocking, which suggested she had been watching from the window, and launched into an account of everything that had happened since Caroline left, including Gerald's feelings about Winter, the resolution of the Jalen situation. He had, as predicted, caught up to himself. The status of the school water cycle project submitted eventually received a B+, which Rosie felt was fair, and the condition of the dishwasher still personal. Still a grudge match, new development involving a strange noise on Tuesdays. "The picture," Caroline said when Rosie paused for breath. Rosie's eyes went wide with the memory of her own promise. She disappeared at a run and came back 40 seconds later with a piece of paper that had been carefully folded and stored somewhere important because it had that look, the look of something handled, often taken out and looked at and put back. Caroline unfolded it. It was a drawing. The crayon kind, unmistakably 7 years old in execution, but completely deliberate in content. 3 figures in front of a house. One tall with brown hair and work boots, Daniel Clearly. One small with a turtle backpack, Rosie. One in the middle, slightly taller than Rosie, with dark hair and a cane and an expression that Rosie had rendered with surprising accuracy, a person who was uncertain but present, trying. Above the house in careful letters, "Our house and Caroline's too. If she wants." Caroline stood in the entryway of Daniel Carr's house and looked at a drawing made by a 7-year-old who had decided, with the radical generosity of a child who had inherited her mother's instinct for seeing people, that a woman she had known for 4 days belonged in the picture. She didn't cry. She was getting better at not crying, and she wasn't sure whether that was strength or something she needed to examine more carefully. But her throat did the thing it did now when something true arrived without warning, and she stood there for a moment before she trusted her voice. "I want," she said. Rosie beamed. Daniel appeared in the hallway, paint on his hands, different boots, same eyes, and looked at Caroline, and then at Rosie, and then at the drawing in Caroline's hand, and the expression on his face was the one she had catalogued over 4 days and could now read clearly. Warm and honest and entirely without agenda. "Pasta again," he said. "I brought groceries," Caroline said. "Real ones. I looked up an actual recipe." "Did it go well?" he said. "Meaning the weeks, meaning the board, meaning all of it." "It went," she said, "and I'm still standing." "That's all that matters," he said. It wasn't, of course. There were still 5 months of proceedings ahead of her. There were regulatory reviews and legal costs, and the long, slow work of rebuilding the trust of 400 employees who had watched the news with understandable alarm. There was her leg to manage, and her sleep to address, and her sister to call more often, and a version of herself to build that was not organized around fear or control, or the exhausting performance of invulnerability. There was, in other words, an enormous amount of ordinary, unglamorous, necessary work ahead. But she was standing, and she was in a house where the walls had children's drawings at a child's height, and dinner was something made from scratch in a kitchen with a missing tile, and the person across the table would tell her the truth without needing anything from her in return. 8 months later, Caroline established the Marsh Carr Foundation. The name was Daniel's idea, or rather it was Rosie's idea, stated as obvious fact at a dinner table in April. If you're doing it together, it should have both your names. The foundation funded housing initiatives for single-parent families and provided legal and financial resources for women navigating corporate and institutional power structures that were designed to make navigation difficult. Daniel's construction company became the foundation's primary building partner. He ran it the way he ran everything, with patience and precision, and without making himself the center of it. He hired 2 crews within the first year. He turned down 3 interviews. He fixed 12 families' homes and began building 4 more. On an evening in October, almost exactly 1 year after a storm had shut down O'Hare International and changed the trajectory of 3 people's lives, Caroline sat on the front porch of a house that was hers, now too. She had her own key, her coat on the 3rd hook, her name written in Rosie's careful hand on a piece of tape on the pantry shelf above the pasta, and watched Rosie run through a pile of leaves in the yard with the committed joy of someone who had never once been taught to hold back. Daniel sat beside her. He handed her a mug, hot water with lemon and honey, his grandmother's cure for everything. She took it. "I spent my whole life trying to be powerful," she said. Not sadly, just honestly, the way she said most things now. "I was so focused on being untouchable that I forgot what I actually wanted to touch." Daniel watched Rosie execute a running leap into the largest section of leaves and disappear briefly from view. "And now," he said. She looked at him. At the yard. At the green things growing along the front walk that had been planted in November and survived the winter and were doing exactly what growing things do when someone finally tends to them. "Now I'm home," she said. He took her hand. And that was true. Not because she had won something or proven something or built something impressive enough to justify her existence in a world that had always demanded she justify it. Not because she had survived Marcus Vane or the board or the press or the 43 years of living behind walls she'd built to keep out pain and had kept out everything else instead. It was true because a man in worn-out boots had stood still long enough for her to see herself clearly. Because a little girl had made room in a drawing. Because for the first time in her life, Caroline Marsh had chosen something not out of fear, not out of strategy, not out of the relentless, exhausting need to be untouchable. She had chosen it because it was real, and real, she had finally learned, was the only thing worth building.